And so today I have a few questions that I had gathered in advance, but you are welcome to post questions that you may have as I'm going through what I've prepared. And I will take moments of rest to make sure that I'm acknowledging the chat for those of you that are here with me live. All right. So let me pull up my chat here. Okay. And also, if you're going through any of your courses and you have questions related to your coursework or anything like that, please feel invited to share that as well. All right, so today we had some questions popping up, and I'll just tell you what the questions are, and then we'll see where the conversation takes us. The first question is, what does secure attachment look like in the body and in relationships? Why do so many successful and self-aware people who feel capable in every other aspect of life still get pulled into painful relationship dynamics even when they know better? What are the clearest signs a connection is aligned with your authentic self versus activating an old attachment wound? And when resistance, numbness, or overwhelming anxiety comes up, how can we start meeting it in a way that supports healing? So we're going to explore these questions, and then I am also at the end going to walk you through a guided visualization and practice to really answer that last question, to help us meet resistance or numbness or overwhelming anxiety and create some anchoring images that we can use when we are feeling that overwhelm, so we can integrate what wisdoms are trying to come through for us and start to feel that insight really sink into your body, so you can feel these changes that you're learning about, not just have a lot of insight into them, right? So make sure to stick with me until the end. We'll have a little practice before we close. Okay. So our first question, what does secure attachment look like in the body and in relationships? So I think I want to start by just giving sort of a reminder of what attachment theory is. You know, it's this idea that our early bonding experiences can shape our nervous systems, and the nervous system then starts to shape our expectations in love. So in adulthood, those expectations can show up as patterns in how we handle things like conflict or separation or negotiating our emotional needs. And these patterns don't make us a certain type of person. Attachment patterns are really more like strategies. And they are strategies that started out as very intelligent and protective, being the most functional way that we could navigate the environments that we were in. And I believe that each strategy has some gift within it. It becomes insecure when whatever we are experiencing leads to some rigidity, or maybe there's an extreme condition. And now we are responding from a place of automation, right? Being habitual rather than conscious. And so when we are feeling more secure, love feels like it is safe to relax into. Our system can experience closeness without bracing for loss, right? We can experience degrees of separation without slipping into urgency or panic. And we can navigate things like conflict without collapsing, shutting down, or withdrawing, right? And so I would have you think of secure attachment as basically a self-trusting way of moving through the world and navigating love and intimacy and connection. It is a kind of magnetism with discernment. It is openness with boundaries. And it is allowing yourself to feel very deeply while still retaining a sense of personal autonomy, right? It is the capacity to hold love without losing ourselves in it. And I think this is why when we have an insecure attachment style, it can feel so hard on the body, because our mind wants love, but our nervous system might still perceive intimacy as a threat. And it creates that urgency. It can create distance, and it can also create these push-pull dynamics in relationships. And that can be super confusing, even when we are very intelligent and highly aware. And I also think it's important to understand that anxious avoidant or disorganized, sometimes called fearful avoidant patterns, are basically a crystallization of survival strategies. And underneath them, I believe there is usually a natural and healthy disposition that is really meant to be a gift. The insecurity happens when the gift that we all carry is hijacked by a sense of threat, and then it becomes extreme. So, for instance, our open hearts, right? These folks that are more anxious leaning in their disposition. We might say that their aligned expression is beautifully relational. They are emotionally attuned, empathic, oriented towards connection. They want to understand. They are willing to repair, and they talk things through. But layer in this survival mode, meaning layer in a harsh condition that puts them into a state of distress. And now we are crystallizing that into a sense of urgency, scanning, overthinking, reassurance seeking, people pleasing, feeling as if we can't settle until we know what's going on for certain. And so then they may start over giving, over explaining, trying to fill the gap between themselves and someone else with a sense of, I need to fix this now. But if we can relax into the gift again, let's say adopt a more secure / aligned position with the gifts that we carry, we just naturally carry, then that same sensitivity becomes a really solid foundation for intimacy. They start to name what they're feeling without feeling flooded. They can ask directly for what they need without feeling like they have to perform for it. They can hold their desires while remaining rooted in self-trust and allowing consistency to be revealed over time rather than going after that sense of certainty in the moment. Now, if we look at our folks who are naturally more avoidant leaning, then we might say they have a disposition towards spaciousness and being self-anchored. They can absorb a lot, and so they need solitude to process and return in a more clear and regulated way. So their medicine, I'm going to call it their medicine. So their medicine may be teaching us how to slow down, right? Teaching us how to slow down, how to take a pause, to connect with ourselves first, to check in before we jump to trying to solve the problem, or before we say something that is impulsive, right? And so what happens when they are encountering a harsh condition is that what happens for them in survival mode, now that turns into a defensive kind of distancing. It is a pulling away with no reassurance. It is not knowing how much space they really need, and then using it as a way to escape or find relief instead of supporting emotional processing. And I often say that, the issue isn't usually that they need space. It's when the space is taken where there is no warmth, there is no clarity, there is no timeline, there's no container, and there's no plan to return. So in their more secure or aligned expression, the space they take becomes conscious and also relational. They can say, I need time to process and I care about you. And I'll check in at such a day and time, even if it's to ask for more space. So there's an ability to name how much space they need. There's an ability to come back with intention to repair or come back to what you were talking about. In the autonomy and the independence that they express, there is integrity and not avoidance. And so now the nervous system learns that closeness doesn't have to mean losing ourselves in it. And then we have our spice of lifers, right? Folks that have disorganized attachment or fearful avoidance. And in their case, I believe the gift is profound depth, a wide emotional range, deep empathy, and also inspirational creativity and capacity for innovation. Sometimes almost a mystical intuition and understanding of people. Folks that are spice of lifers can perceive very subtle dynamics. They can hold paradoxes, and that's because of splitting. Their habit towards splitting when they're feeling insecure actually lends it themselves when they are aligned to understand the depth of both the highs and the lows of life. And so they're able to see both the light and the shadow in people and still understand them as a whole, right? But when they have experienced these negative conditions, right, and they are put into survival mode because of attachment, injuries, or threats, then closeness and a sense of danger wind up getting wired together. And now we start to see that push-pull, the intensity and then a withdrawal, the testing behaviors, sometimes self-sabotaging behaviors, feeling like they are bracing even while they are still craving intimacy. But if we can start to soften that and start to be, again, more aligned with our inherent, what I believe are our inherent gifts, then that depth becomes really a deep devotion. The intensity can fuel creative power and innovation and allow for increased organization, right? The ability to think abstractly, the ability to find unanticipated solutions, as opposed to feeling like they're lost in an emotional chaos. So if I were to kind of, maybe summarize my answer, if we're looking at the experience of secure attachment, then I would describe it as really being aligned with the unique gifts that we each carry in love. Not that I'm anxious, so I have to be secure before I'm healed. No, we soften what we have absorbed or adopted so we can relax into our own gifts, which are already there and have been all the while. And the way it's going to look for you is going to be nuanced and unique and special, right? And now you have just a greater sense of inner safety so that your gifts can kind of stay online, right? So our empathy becomes discernment. A need for space is simply an opportunity for connecting to your inner compass and finding deeper clarity. Our emotional depth and intensity becomes wisdom and a kind of creative alchemy. And now relationships stop being a way to manage fear, and they become a place where we can start playing with who is my authentic self and how can I share that with someone? And how does sharing that with someone expand our experience of the world and really the collective experience? Right. That's a great question. The other question we had here, and again, as I'm going through these questions, if any thoughts, reflections come up, please feel invited to put those in the chat and I'll give you some acknowledgement. We had another question. Why do so many high achievers feel powerful and capable in life, but still get pulled into painful dynamics, even when they know better? Okay. So we may have high achievers who seem to have accomplished a lot. And they may feel powerful and capable in their lives because they've mastered environments where their efforts result in positive outcomes, right? Or predictable outcomes. So you work hard, you get the degree, you get the job, or you build the business, you hit your milestones. And that degree of competency gets rewarded by our society. And so your nervous system learns a somewhat simple equation, which is if I perform well, then I will be safe. I will be loved. I will be approved of, and so on. And that's an equation that works really well in our careers and in our productive lives. but sometimes it winds up becoming kind of a default strategy in our relationships. And what we don't realize is that when we are applying it in our love relationships, it can kick up a shame story that lives underneath, sort of hidden and underneath all that competence. And it's hard to recognize the shame story because it is obscured by all of our success. So from the outside and on the surface, we may feel confident. I don't have a worthiness issue. I have all this esteem. I have all this confidence. Look at how successful I am. And that's exactly why sometimes it can be really tricky to feel like I've done all the things that are supposed to work and it's not working. Because the core of what's in operation behind the scenes is very sneaky. It's not that because it is as if the original grain of sand around which we have spun our pearl never really quite disappeared. We just learned how to manage it really well. We learned how to organize ourselves around proving that I am worthy, I am lovable to ourselves and to others, because we've learned how to produce evidence, right? But we become content machines, right? We're constantly proving something to ourselves. It's as if the successes are our side of the argument, so to speak, right? And that means that if we are constantly trying to produce evidence to the fact that I don't have a self-esteem problem, or I don't have a shame story at the core of it, then it means that there is a tender part of us that is still feels like there is, because we're working so hard to prove otherwise. And so typically what happens is a relationship will come in and expose that part, because intimacy isn't, supported by credentials and doesn't necessarily perform the way you might in a performance review at work. So love doesn't respond to excellence in the way that our careers do. It responds to emotional safety, to consistency and vulnerability. So when our connections feel uncertain, we might have someone who's very successful or a high achiever reach for what has always worked for them before. So that might look like trying harder, over-functioning, overthinking, over-explaining, over-giving, perfecting our communication, acquiring more tools. And then without realizing it, we're trying to earn stability in the way that we've earned everything else. I like to call this the success-driven heartbreak cycle. And it starts usually with some kind of catalytic moment or loss or change or experience in your life. In my line of work, it's usually a relationship that kind of knocks somebody off their center unexpectedly. And there's a spark of attraction that feels very strong, but it also has within it sort of a kernel of uncertainty. And it can inspire in us this sort of, I can win their love. If I can get that curmudgeon to love me, then I will have proven it to them and to myself. I like a challenge, right? And so now the uncertainty in the relationship starts over time to register as a kind of urgency. We might experience it as a kind of chemistry. And perhaps now to secure it, we start investing a little bit too much too soon, or we start giving more than we receive, and we start organizing ourselves around that bond. But then a split happens. One part of us is like, wait, this feels like this is too much, or this feels like something's not quite right here. It's like a self-aware part of us who's acquiring a lot of insight and expanding as we go through this contraction at the same time, right? There's the part that knows their value. And then there's the other part now that has started rising to the surface. It's a part that is scanning for emotional cues, kind of bracing against a fear of loss or abandonment, trying to manage the situation so things don't feel uncertain. and preventing an inevitable hurt of some kind. And then we may start using our insight as a weapon. So this is what I call double troubles. Now we're anxious about how anxious we are, and we're judging ourselves for spiraling. And then we get down on ourselves for being down on ourselves. And now we have this internal war or rumination and hypervigilance going on. And then that can sometimes lead to little small but accumulative self-abandonments that are disguised as devotion and that we justify as being unconditional love. But then something happens and it doesn't work anymore, and there's a crash or a breakup, or they ghost, or you just can't take it anymore, and there's resentment and grief. There's some kind of rupture. And now there's like a heartbreak that's come up that touches on that original piece of sand, the kernel of a shame story that is old and perhaps forgotten, but now awake and alive. Or maybe we are aware of it for the very first time. And we realize that the skills that we acquired in our career and our lives are not the skills that we're going to need in order to work through this. But we don't have to abandon those skills. We don't have to give them up. They are real strengths. The shift that we want to affect is learning how to source those skills from a different place emotionally and energetically. So instead of now using our talents and achievements as a kind of shield, they can become a dynamic and embodied expression of who we are. So instead of feeling like we have to perform for love, now all those skills are powered by a feeling of being anchored in self-trust. And so that means that we are going to look into and meet what lives in our blind spots with compassion. And we may start to talk to and find some earlier shame stories that told us, I have to be exceptional in order to be chosen. I have to be special in order to be loved. And we let go of all of that. I don't need to be chosen. I don't need to be special because I am love. I am love itself, and I take myself wherever I go. I need not find it because anyone I interact with expands the love that I already am and have. And that's a truer place energetically and emotionally and spiritually to source those resources from. This is what I call soul-centered security. So it is that now our successes and love come from wholeness instead of a sort of unconscious proving of our worth. And we're much more aware of our blind spots and what lives in them. Right. So this is how and why, even though we can have highly successful and capable people still be blindsided in love. Because it is, I believe, the love relationship now most likely showed up because you were so successful and everything was going so well. Because which means that, okay, now there's a part of you that says, we're doing really well. I guess we can, in order to expand, in order to increase our capacity, in order to welcome more abundance and energy into my life, it's time to go back and look at that early unconscious shame story so I can sweep out that dusty corner and make more room. I'm ready now. I can handle it. So sometimes people will say they feel like they've regressed or they thought they dealt with it or whatnot. And I would say anytime it comes back around, it's because you did deal with it. It's because you had done the work. And now you're ready for a new level of expanded capacity. So I'm going to take a pause there. Is this resonating with anyone? I haven't seen any notes in the chat yet. Can anyone relate to this? Let me know. Okay, we had another question here. What are some signs that a connection is aligned with your intuition or your authentic self versus some signs that something is activating an old attachment wound or anxiety? Okay. So, well, before I begin, has anyone ever had that question? How do I know if it's my intuition or if it's just my anxiety getting kicked up? Is that something that anyone here has struggled with? That was probably my biggest question when I started doing this work. And I think it's a tough one because it's confusing, because both anxiety and intuition are communicated through our body, right? Through our sensory experience. And so when a connection is really aligned with our intuitive, or let's call it authentic self, thanks, Leanne. Usually there will be a softening or an opening, and a steadiness at the same time. It doesn't mean that it's always comfortable. Sometimes our intuition may call us to look at something that is asking for our attention because it feels lonely, or it feels like it's grieving, or it feels ashamed, or it feels guilty about something. And it is our intuition that is raising it into our awareness, because it needs to be integrated, it needs to be loved, it needs to be looked at, it needs to be listened to. And now it becomes part of the whole again, right? So feeling into our intuition isn't always like, oh, it's bliss, although it can be. But sometimes it's something that just gently brings us up to our edge. In a relationship, you might feel attraction, but it doesn't come with a kind of urgent or frantic sort of sharpness to it. So it's not like I need to lock this down right now or I'm going to lose them. It's more like, ooh, this feels good, and I'm going to enjoy staying grounded while I watch it unfold. And so we tend to feel a little bit more like ourselves in the presence of someone where there's space for our intuition to rest and take place and to manifest. The nervous system might feel settled in and attuned in connecting with someone instead of spinning out with anxiety. When you're connected to the intuitive self, or you're aligned with a more secure expression of your gifts, we can speak honestly without rehearsing every sentence in our heads. There's not that pressure to perform, right? Or to try to manage the communication or the relationship in order to keep it. And also just noticing how the connection grows. So there will be room and space for it to build through consistency, through mutual effort, and even through repairs after conflict. And even if there remains some uncertainty, your inner compass, I'm going to call it, remains online. You can still tap into what you know about yourself. Right? Now, if you feel a connection may be stimulating an old attachment wound or anxiety, the body is going to communicate that in kind of a loud and urgent way. So chemistry might feel intense, but intensity alone is not a bad thing. It's an intensity that comes with sort of a tension with it. It's an intensity, instead of alivening us and waking us up, it can kind of create this sort of like, almost like an adrenaline. Adrenaline is involved, but it's like an adrenaline, shot of adrenaline. We can have hyper focus. There's almost like a compulsive need for clarity in order to control. We start scanning for things, replaying text messages, stalking people's social media, wondering, strategizing, if I say this, they will do that. And then we may start bargaining with our own standards, right? And sometimes this can be a slippery slope, because especially if we're very insightful people, we have a lot of self-awareness, we're interested in self-development. And of course, these things require some degree of being willing to question yourself, right? Because how else are we going to see outside our own ego if we don't pause and ask and question ourselves every so often, right? But when it is stemming from this sort of attachment anxiety, it will kind of take hold of that and manipulate it and make it very rigid to the point where you may become so hyper-focused, tense, self-doubting that your body kind of short circuits. And now maybe you shut down or you numb out or you get really irritable. There's that. Now you have that strong urge to withdraw or pull back without being able to articulate what's coming up for you presently and communicate it clearly. And so we wind up becoming a little bit less anchored in our lives. Maybe your sleep changes. Maybe it's hard to focus on work. And your mind just can't help but circle around this connection like it's a problem to solve. So a question we might ask ourselves is, does this expand my sense of self-trust? Or am I being sent down a path of doubting myself and second guessing everything? Right. So when we're in that state of intuitive alignment, you're going to feel a capacity to strengthen the relationship by being able to use your voice and your resources. If you're in a state of anxious activation, you may find yourself arguing with or negotiating with it. And this is when we start crossing our own boundaries in order to stay close. And then we call it unconditional love, but it's really a form of self-abandonment, right? So if over time you start to feel more clear, more grounded, more resourced, then your intuition is informing you and it's being honored in a relationship. If over time you start to feel more anxious, performative, or withdrawing and avoidant, or emotionally confused, then a survival strategy is probably running the show. And of course, the invitation here is not to judge ourselves for that, because there's wisdom in that too. And to find it, we can slow down, reconnect to our bodies, and allow consistency to really guide us through and navigate the intensity that we feel until we find our way back to center. Right. So I'm just gonna. So that was the answer to the question: signs of when we are living in an intuitive and authentic way versus activated by an attachment wound. So I just want to acknowledge our chat. How do we soften old strategies in the first part if we don't feel safe emotionally yet? Great question. So we have a guided practice we're going to do in the second part in just a minute. And this is a demonstration of how I would suggest you do that, because it's about building a relationship to your inner world. And the core of all insecurity is emotional confusion. So the more access we have to, and the better scaffolded our understanding of our emotional energy, allows you to develop a more varied and, let's say, wide-ranging language for the nuances of your energetic and emotional experiences. And when you can feel into the nuances of the energy moving through you, you don't get swamped by it, right? And there's a little bit of skill building here, recognizing the quality of our thoughts, the words we are summoning to describe our thoughts and feelings. There's a little bit of learning how to reframe the way that our thoughts are trying to organize the bodily experience. And then, of course, it goes in the other direction. We work with the bodily experience through things like story and metaphor and visceral experiential activities, somatic activities, because now we're organizing energy on the body level, because the body is the first organizer of experience. And then once the body shifts into a different state, now maybe new words become available, new thoughts, new beliefs, right? So it's a little infinity symbol, right? They feed off of each other. And then today I'm just going to walk you through a guided practice to create some imagery that we can use as metaphors for how we hold our inner emotional world. So I think you're going to like that. I often wonder if my anxious tendencies overpower my intuition. I've noticed this lately, being calm in my body and not anxious. Yeah. So it is true. It can be more difficult to access our intuition when we're in survival mode because you are a spiritual being having a physical experience, and the body obviously needs to retain its integrity, right? So in order to continue living in this material world, the body has to feel safe. And if it doesn't, that is always going to become our top priority. Now, of course, there can be moments where your survival instinct and your intuition overlap, especially if you're in a truly threatening situation, right? But oftentimes it becomes when we get mixed up is when we're not in an obviously life-threatening situation, and yet we feel the urgency as if we are, right? And so that's often when the confusion comes in. So finding ways to settle the nervous system and the body will create more opportunities for the intuitive self to be accessed. This is also increasing capacity. So I said settle the body, but sometimes increasing our capacity means activating it. So what do I mean by that? So there's something called breath work is really, I think, profoundly useful for this. There's breath work that allows you to move into a vagus state, meaning calm the nervous system. So, and the simplest one is just taking a breath and extending the exhale. And just each time you inhale and exhale, extending the exhale as long as you can. That's, just a quick way to try to turn on the vagus nerve, which is the more related part, most recently evolved part of the nervous system. Helps you feel connected and safe. But there's also things like holotropic breathing, which doesn't calm the nervous system, but activates it. So like breath of fire, actually turning on the nervous system and giving yourself an opportunity to shake it out. Peter Levine talks about this in a wonderful way. He wrote a book on somatic experiencing. For those of you, if you've heard of it, let me know. But basically, it's the idea that if we look at the animal kingdom, when an animal is under threat, they evade the predator or they escape the threat, and they literally shake their bodies to shake it off, to dispel that survival energy. We don't do that. So we experience a threat and then we lock it up. We lock it down. And so the idea is that that energy gets stored in your body, in your nervous system. And when we go through a healing process, sometimes we feel it's hard because it's a process of allowing those stored energy to come up and out. And so when we talk about activating breath, we're talking about leaning in a little bit and allowing the nervous system to be activated and to shake it out. And it can feel like panic. And so you're like, all right, I'm just giving myself the opportunity, ideally in a safe space and container, whether that's with a therapist or other container, to be in panic. I feel panicked and I'm going to let myself feel panic and I'm going to breathe through it. And I'm going to shake and I'm going to breathe it out. And now you are moving it in a very visceral way. And maybe the stories, maybe as you're breathing it, you've got these memories you didn't know you had, or you've got these, and then maybe you get intuitive hits all along the way as well. And now you have made space, quite literally. You've shaken it out, you've shaken it off, and you've made space on the level of the body and the nervous system. And this increases capacity. So maybe now the next time you encounter something that may have set you off before and you locked it down, you encounter it again and you breathe through it instead. And maybe you literally shake it off. Ugh, that was nasty. Okay, gone. And you let it go instead of locking it down or holding on to it. And this expands your capacity. This makes space. And now that urgency doesn't come up so quickly or so sharply anymore because you've trained your nervous system not to fear the shake. And so you're not so afraid. The mind now has a different story about that. Yeah. I'm finding in perimenopause that I get more triggered for longer. The rage is valid, and I'm speaking up for myself more than in the past, but I'm not good at expressing it in a productive way yet. So that may be where, well, of course, in perimenopause, there's a lot of hormonal changes, and that is going to have a significant impact on all parts of your body, right? And the way that you experience mood, and the way that you experience your body. But if you feel that sometimes we can feel like, I know for me, anger was a big part of my journey. And I was someone who definitely did not express anger. I thought if I expressed my anger, it would just lay waste to all my relationships because I had so much of it. And because I had so much of it, I didn't allow myself to feel it. So I thought I didn't have any anger. Nothing bothered me. I'm fine. And finally, it was like after a tipping point, it was years after my divorce, but then I had this like fast and furious relationship, which was a catalyst for me. And I realized, wow, I had a lot of anger. And but I was very fearful of opening it up because I thought it would be endless and certainly didn't have words for it. And I've told this story before, but there's actually a video of this on my YouTube channel. I decided I had to confront anger. It was like an intellectual decision I made. I have to confront my anger. I have to express it. So I decided I was going to smash some dishes. I always had a fantasy about smashing dishes to release my anger, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. So I finally decided I was going to do it and I was going to be tidy. So I set up a nice little tidy tarp in my kitchen and I pulled out only the ugly dishes. And I set up a little camera because maybe I'd get some good content marketing out of it. And I would go to throw a dish and I just couldn't bring myself to release my grip. And I just started, luckily I have some knowledge in somatics. So I started beating my chest and shaking my hands and groaning and moaning. And finally it came up, and it came up like a whoop, like a wave. And I smashed the first dish and then I smashed the next four and it was not enough. And I started arm sweeping the dishes in my kitchen. I can't believe no one called the police because in my little teeny tiny Manhattan apartment, I made such a ruckus. And it was like I had popped a cork, all this energy flowing through me. Right. And I didn't have to express it in a productive way per se. I didn't need to have words for it because the energy itself spoke for itself. So I am a creative person. So I collected some of the shards and I put them on a piece of paper and I spray painted the negative spaces. So I ended up having this fractured kind of image. And then I decided to turn it into a mandala. So I added to it and layered on different shapes and colors. And so I didn't necessarily articulate my anger, but I certainly expressed it. And I used my other talents and skills to integrate the experience creatively. And I would say to give yourself a little grace because you don't have to be skilled at expressing it in a productive way yet, right? So you want to ask yourself, what do I even mean by productive? Productive as in what? You get the reaction you want from people? So that would be the same sort of underlying belief and concern that kept the anger bottled up in the first place, right? What about responding too productively to someone who's tried to shame me in front of my family? So this is about boundaries, right? So boundaries are what well, that's a very good trigger. So that person gave you some good information about themselves in that moment, right? And we only feel triggered if we think that what they said had some truth to it. So if they tried to shame you and you felt triggered, then they touched upon a shame you do carry. And the anger is probably protecting you from the sting of that shame. So now that's an opportunity, first off, right? That's the gift to be found in it. And then it is looking at, okay, now I have a knowledge and an understanding of what they just brought up in me. And whatever they just brought up in you, it was about an event that happened 20 years ago that was not entirely my fault, right? So now I suspect maybe it came up because you have arrived at a place in your life and experience where you're ready to release that. And the angry part that protects it, is letting that be known. And the practical side is now thinking about what can you do to honor yourself in that situation. So remember, a boundary is what you will do. So for instance, let's say someone tried to shame you in front of your family. So there might be someone that you care about, or that was invited to be in the vicinity of your family. You would expect that that person would be respectful, right? So we might have a standard or an expectation. I only surround myself with respectful people. So what happens when someone shows up and they're disrespectful and they try to shame you in front of your family, right? Well, we feel triggered because that doesn't match up with our standards. We feel through the trigger. We look at what hook do they still have in me, and how now can I be in charge of that hook so it doesn't happen again. And my boundary now is, this person is, if they were someone that you could disinvite, a boundary might be, I'm not inviting this person again. If it's something you can't help because someone else invited them to the family gathering, now it's about it was my sister who moved to town. Yeah. So now it becomes asking yourself some questions about how much of my time, energy, effort, and attention am I going to contribute to this relationship and this person, whomever they are, right? What are my limits around that? And some of that you learn by experiencing what you experienced, right? Feeling into what feels good, what doesn't feel good. And then I suspect it will be looking at what part of the shame do you still carry? And then looking at how much of this is actually mine to carry, or how much of this was installed because somebody else had some story about fault and blame, right? Or couldn't be accountable for their part. So that's kind of where I would recommend exploring next. But I would also have you think about how you're defining productive. So if productive means in service of my highest good and the good of all, then I would say it's about getting to the core of that story, releasing what is not yours, processing and integrating what is yours, and then creating a boundary around it moving forward. If productive is about getting her to behave a different way, that's not a battle you can win. All you can do is proceed in your integrity, and she'll join you or she won't. You can extend an invitation and she'll join you there or she won't. But the way you get out from underneath that trigger is to work with the shame that you carry around it, because you wouldn't have been triggered if you aren't carrying any. Right? I hope that helps. Okay. So I'm aware of our time, and I would like to transition into a guided practice. So I like to call this practice attachment alchemy and secure in the sacred bowl. And when I say secure in the sacred bowl, I'm going to be referencing the Hindu chakra system. And we're going to be working with the sacral chakra, which is between the hips and beneath the navel. This is the part of the body and the energy center associated with emotional connection, with intimacy, with creativity, play, sexuality, the ability to hold complexities without collapsing into either or black or white thinking. And it's our center of balance. This is where we tend to really connect to our emotional intelligence. Okay. And it can, if we have imbalances in our sacral, it can show up through things like attachment injuries and all of the sort of activating and deactivating strategies that come with insecure attachment styles when our gifts have become crystallized because of the stress and, let's say, environments that we have to navigate. So in this practice, I want to take us on a journey to connect to our sacral. And we're going to picture our sacral as a sacred bowl. This is a bowl that we all carry in our bodies. It's a bowl that holds our emotional energy, which we're going to explore as your emotional waters. So I invite you to find a comfortable spot, whether you are seated or lying down. And we're just going to turn our attention to the breath, noticing the way the oxygen fills your lungs and the way you are releasing it without any need to change it. Just witnessing your inner space. And for today's practice, I'm going to have you bring your attention to that sacral, that space between your hips and just below the navel. And if it feels good, you could even put a hand on your lower belly just to connect to that part. And as you touch your lower belly, just imagine that you are cradling your sacred bowl, your sacred container. It's also a good metaphor for your essential emotional boundary. And I'm just going to have you take a pause for a moment and notice the quality of your bowl, its shape, its size, what material it's made out of: metal, stone, glass, wood. Does it have a texture? Is it smooth? Is it rough? Does it have a temperature? Is it warm or is it cold? And your imagination helps you out here. So if you feel like you're not someone who pictures things, just imagine. What might it be? And now I'd like you to inspect your bowl for any signs of wear. So are there any cracks or holes or chips or leaks or thin spots? Just noticing if there's any wear and tear on your bowl. And not because we're judging it, but we're just witnessing what your bowl has had to carry. And once you've got that, now I'd like you to notice that your bowl carries some water. And just notice the quality of your waters. Are your waters clear, or maybe they're a little muddy? Are they shallow or are they deep? Do they feel heavy and stagnant? Or are they rushing, swirling? Is it hot and boiling? Maybe frozen? Maybe lukewarm? Just noticing the nature of your waters today. Now, with your one hand on your sacrum, I'm going to have you take your other hand and you're going to place it over your heart. And just take a deep breath into your heart. And imagine your heart as a wise, intuitive guide. And just drop a question into your heart. What does my bowl need today? What does my bowl need today? And just allow a response to emerge. Could be something practical, like it needs tape, or it needs a sealant, or it needs a plug. Or it could be something more abstract, like it needs a blessing, it needs a hug, it needs a lid. Just let whatever come in the way that it will. And take a breath and ask another question. What do my waters need? What do my waters need? And just listen. And even if you feel like you're disconnected or you've just got static, all of that's information. It's all correct. And now I'd have you imagine you're going to take your hand off your heart and you're going to drop it down to your sacral. So you have both hands on your sacral. And we're going to supply your bowl and your waters with what they need. So just imagine offering to your bowl and to your waters exactly what the heart says it needs. And remember, we're being playful here, so you can just visualize that in whatever way it comes to you. It can be completely unrealistic. And so I'm going to offer some affirmations. Today, I restore my sacred bowl. Today, I am safe to hold my emotional truth. And today, I keep only what belongs to me and I return that which doesn't. And just notice if anything shifts for your bowl or your waters. It is safe to soften. It is safe to flow. And your bowl will retain its integrity. Now we have one last task before we complete our practice. Now I'd like you to imagine gathering your bowl, and we're going to descend 5 steps a little bit lower to your root chakra, which is in the perianum and genital region. So we're going to descend 5 steps, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And now I want you to imagine that you see a patch of fertile soil and earth there in your root chakra. And as you approach this fertile earth, you're going to plant a seed. And this seed represents your highest intention for how you want to show up in life and in love moving forward. And so you're going to plant that seed in your inner earth. Maybe offer a little blessing. And I invite you to water that seed with your purified bowl and water, nourishing it with what it needs. And just take a few breaths to observe if any roots grow, if any buds spring up, any blossoms emerge. Just giving it a moment, remembering to breathe and witness. And so I invite you to take a snapshot of that witnessing in your mind. Breathing it in almost as if it is a fragrance, letting it sink in through your lungs into your heart and your bloodstream, pumping to the rhythm of your heartbeat from your crown to your toes, from your fingertips to your nose, just allowing this to become a form of cell memory and body knowledge. And knowing and trusting that in the future, if action is required, when the time is right, deeper wisdoms will rise to your conscious mind and you will know what to do. And so now we can gather our bowl and return to the sacrum, climbing up the stairs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Replacing the bowl in the sacrum once more. And we can take another breath and release it with a sigh. And I'm going to count backwards from 5 to 1. And when we reach 1, we can release our practice in full. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And so I invite you to maybe jot down or sketch what you witnessed and observed in your inner space. So if you want to journal with this later, you might jot down, what did your bowl need? How did it look when you first encountered it? And what did it need? And the same thing for your waters. Did you notice anything shift after you supplied your bowl and your waters with what they needed? And finally, when you planted the seed of your highest intention, what happened? Did you notice anything take root or start to grow? And this is a practice I would recommend you come back to. So in another couple of days or couple weeks, just drop down into your sacrum and your root and just notice, has my seed grown or evolved? And you might notice that over time, these images start to create that inner scaffolding. And as you become more familiar with your inner scaffolding, you start to trust in that sense of inner safety. And it makes you just a little more resilient in navigating your circumstances. So yes, you don't have to worry about thinking about what they need, right? So if we're thinking, we're sort of using the head. Part of what we want to do is access the body. So if you noticed that there was like a static or a blank space, or my thoughts were empty, then maybe that's what your bowl and your water needed. So I couldn't think of what they needed. I was empty of thoughts. Then that's what they needed. Less thinking. Okay. And then you saw the seed grow. Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. I've decided to have boundaries around not spending time alone with her and not sharing personal information. Those sound like excellent boundaries to me. Yeah. So thank you everyone for joining me. I hope that you enjoyed today's activity. And the replay, I will be sending out the replay after that. I should make mention that these are the kind of practices we do inside the Secure Spark Studio membership. I'll include some information on that with the replay. And also we're coming to the end of season and we're starting a new cycle in season. So we'll be having a workshop, maybe 1 or 2 workshops next month to introduce the membership. And if you'd like to do more work like this, we will be having a special enrollment opportunity. So keep your eye out for that. Thank you, everyone. I so appreciate you being here with me live, and I look forward to connecting with you on our next call. Enjoy the